Politico published an absolutely horrific account from a 41-year-old woman that Graham Platner dated named Jenny Racicot, who alleges that in 2021, Platner let himself into her home without her consent, and he raped her. She explicitly told him to stop, and he refused to comply. She also told him to not finish inside of her since she wasn't on birth control, and again, he refused to comply. Now, weeks after she confirmed that he didn't impregnate her against her will, she sent him a private message on Instagram telling him that the encounter wasn't consensual and also told him to never contact her again. And even though Platner denies the allegation, well, I don't believe him. I believe his victim, because this is a credible allegation and she has corroborating evidence proving that he did, in fact, commit this crime, which is the key word. This is a fucking crime. And all this time, this monster knew what he did. He might not remember what he did since he was blackout drunk when he allegedly committed this crime, but guess what? Being drunk isn't legally defensible in the court of law. And regardless if he remembers what he did or not, he knows that he did this to her since she told him that he did this to her. Yet, he went out of his fucking way to portray himself as some sort of reformed misogynist who disavowed the posts he made on Reddit minimizing rape in the military and eventually learned to draw inspiration from women and learn to respect them, but it was all nothing more than an act. He knew what he'd been accused of, but decided to lie about it in hopes that the people of Maine would only find out after they voted to give him power, once it'd be too late to take it back. Now, his most prominent supporters in the center and on the left are thankfully calling on him to drop out, which is the obvious thing that the campaign needs to do at this point. But I don't think that that's sufficient, because what he allegedly did to that poor woman is a fucking crime. It happened just 5 years ago. We're not talking about some decades-old allegation. The statutes of limitations hasn't passed. So he needs to be prosecuted before he can do this to someone else, and that's assuming he hasn't already done this to more women. But if more women do come forward, then, I'll be clear, I'm not going to be surprised, because quite frankly, if you're sociopathic enough to enjoy murdering people, you're probably not going to have any moral qualms about rape as well. And that's why you really shouldn't be surprised about Graham Platner doing this to this woman. I say that because in Platner's own words, he said, quote, "It's hard to explain how much I enjoyed combat," and later admitted, "I was never a huge fan of killing, at least not for killing's sake, but I did love the winning, and that required killing. When a fight is over and your element has not only survived, but also killed or captured enemy combatants, well, it's a feeling of accomplishment that cannot be replicated. It's one of the purest forms of contest, but explaining that to someone who hasn't experienced it is difficult. In the end, civilian life really seems devoid of purpose or excitement after intense combat. Given the choice of a safe, stable, and fulfilled civilian life or another tour like Ramadi in 2006, I wouldn't even hesitate." And I can't not read this and conclude that this man is a violent fucking sociopath. So of course, if he enjoys killing people, or enjoys the reward that comes with killing people, then odds are he's gonna be violent when it comes to other areas of his life. But yet, on the campaign trail, he pretended like he was a begrudging pawn of the military-industrial complex, a mere cog in the machine, because that served this narrative that he was trying to cook up, that he was anti-war. But privately, he couldn't even put into words how much he enjoyed imperialist wars. See, other leftist vets who sincerely oppose U.S. imperialism, they get out as fast as they can, and then they spend the rest of their lives opposing U.S. imperialism and the U.S. war machine. Think Mike Preisner, for example. Graham Platner, however, he's not like one of those vets. He signed up to do 4 tours, and he served in Fallujah, as well as Abu Ghraib, and it still was not enough violence for him because he then joined Blackwater. And in a local newspaper article about him, he was pictured with his Blackwater baseball cap, which he wore, quote, "just to get a rise out of those who remember the controversial contractor for its heavy-handed tactics in providing security to diplomats and other VIPs as they traveled the mean streets of Baghdad." And just in case it wasn't obvious enough, when they say heavy-handed tactics, they mean war crimes. Now, when Platner is asked about his time at Blackwater on podcasts, he lies, and he claims that he didn't work for Blackwater, he worked for Constellus, which is disingenuous because Constellus is the corporation that absorbed other private military companies, including Blackwater. So even though everybody really loves a good redemption arc story, myself included, it's hard to believe that he's a reformed war criminal when he is still fucking lying about his past. And it's especially hard to buy his supposed reform story arc when he's so inconsistent. On the campaign trail, he'll frequently talk about his opposition to war, yet if you look at his platform, he says he only opposes, quote, pointless wars, which might seem like an innocuous inclusion, but it gives him a way to support wars in the future that he doesn't view as pointless. If you'll recall, Tulsi Gabbard's specific caveat was that she opposed regime change wars specifically, so closeted warmongers, they use this kind of weaselly language to give themselves plausible deniability in the future, so that way you don't feel betrayed by their militarism. But Graham Platner in particular didn't really try to hide his warmongering instincts that hard. For example, he included a reference to the shipbuilding gap between China and the United States, which most people wouldn't care about unless they're invested in the United States maintaining global military hegemony. And in the same section, he promised to work tirelessly to rebuild the American military, which is a talking point neocons use to foster support for even more military spending. And let's not forget about his goal to address the military recruitment crisis, which is an odd thing to include in your platform if you're actually a committed anti-imperialist, because if you're sincerely angry about how the military-industrial complex chewed you up and spit you out, you would logically view the so-called recruitment crisis as an inherently good thing, would you not? Because it means less Americans are signing up to be cogs in the machine of the U.S. empire. But Platner thinks it's bad that less people are signing up, even though he's publicly claiming to be anti-war, and sometimes implies that he regrets his own time overseas. See, all of these little contradictions here and there, these are signs that this man is a motherfucking liar. And as good of a politician as he admittedly is, he never stopped talking out of both sides of his mouth. Sometimes he'd speak to the pointlessness of the wars that he served in.
I am very proud to be a United States Marine. I am very proud to have been an infantryman. However, I also do not know the value of my service.
Other times, he described value to the wars he fought in.
If you reflect Maine's values, why are you funding masked agents who are ripping our neighbors off the streets, driving them off in unmarked vans? That is not the freedom that I served 4 tours defending.
Right, because when you were murdering people in Iraq, you were actually defending our freedom. Got it. Spoken like a true anti-imperialist. But if you put aside his wishy-washy position on Iraq, seeing as how it's going to be hard for him to be impartial about a war that he participated in directly, he's at least pretty consistent on the genocide against Palestinians, right? I mean, kinda. He's at least objectively better than all of his opponents, at least rhetorically speaking. But the problem is that, since he lied about his time in the military and Blackwater, there's a chance that he's also not telling the truth about his opposition to the Gaza genocide as well. And I can't say with certainty, but there's a non-zero chance that he's just saying what he thinks he needs to say to get elected, because on October 7th of 2025, he condemned Hamas and called for the Israeli hostages to be released while saying absolutely fuck all about the thousands of Palestinian hostages. And to top it off, he referred to the genocide as a war. Now, several hours later, after people accused him of providing cover to Israel for the genocide that they're committing in Palestine, he followed up with a post calling it a genocide in order to placate his naysayers. And listen, sometimes people make mistakes, and they don't realize how they're unwittingly playing into the hands of imperialist oppressors. But the question is, who was Platner even trying to appeal to with that nod to Israel in the first place? It doesn't make sense, and it's seemingly out of character. And I can only speculate, but he has a brother-in-law, Seth Frantzman, who maybe had some influence over him, seeing as how Frantzman is in the industry of pro-Israel influence, meaning he is literally employed with an Israeli-based think tank and is the author of a pro-Israel book where he justifies their brutality against their neighbors and genocide of Palestinians. And by all accounts, Platner seems to be pretty close with his Zionist brother-in-law. Here's one of the many photos of them taken together. And if you look in the corner there, you might see a Blackwater magnet on the refrigerator, because Graham Platner must have collected all of their merch. Now, to be fair, you can't really control who your family is, obviously, but if you're close with a genocide-supporting family member who's in the industry of influence peddling specifically for Israel, I don't necessarily think that it's unreasonable to question whether or not that individual is going to have an influence on your perception of this issue when you're in power, especially given how you're untrustworthy on other issues as well. You've lied, so I think that this is another question that we have to ask ourselves. Can he be trusted when it comes to this issue, knowing that he's going to have a fucking Zionist Israeli influencer chirping in his ear? But you see, this is the thing about Graham Platner. He's hard for some people to pin down. He protested Bush's Iraq war as a young man, which is a plus, but then signed up to fight in that war months later, which is a negative. He'll bemoan his military service publicly, then privately talk about how orgasmic it was to slaughter brown people in a country that he invaded. And then there's the Nazi tattoo, another thing that he lied about, as explained by Rebecca Watson, aka Skepchick, in her video about Platner from last November. And in October of 2025, I released a video where I tried to be as fair and nuanced as possible to Platner and his supporters, but ultimately decided I'm out, because there were just too many warning signs pointing to him being the next John Fetterman, and I based my conclusion mostly on things that he said after he launched his campaign that didn't quite add up to me, but I still offered to bring him on Leftist Mafia so that way he could address some of our concerns, and guess what? I never heard back from him. Shocker. Because as we learned with Tulsi Gabbard's campaign for president in 2019, it's much easier for these bullshitters to uphold their facade if they exclusively talk to media figures who aren't going to challenge them. And my point in bringing up all of these red flags and inconsistencies and lies in light of the rape allegation isn't to object to the idea that people can change. People absolutely can change. But Graham Platner very clearly is not one of those individuals who's changed, contrary to popular belief. He is, and always has been, a violent fucking sociopath. The warning signs were there, people just chose to ignore them. So given his violent history and love of violence, I don't think it's too surprising to know that he was also capable of raping someone as well. Because if you're willing to take a life with your bare hands again and again and again, and can't stop reminiscing about the days when you murdered people and committed crimes against humanity, there's absolutely nothing beneath you. And even though I'm pleased to see some of his most prominent and vocal supporters on the left call on him to drop out, I do fear that his popularity on the left may have actually done irreparable harm to our movement, because quite frankly, it's a bad fucking look to give him a pass for victimizing brown people, but then draw the line when he finally victimizes a white person. That reeks of Western chauvinism, and it makes white leftists look out of touch and tone deaf, especially because there were so many black and Arab leftists who tried to voice their concerns, but they were ignored or attacked for purity testing and called liberals for trying to get white leftists to take their concerns seriously. It's not like they were making any unreasonable requests. They were just like, hey man, maybe don't go so hard for Platner, and they were told to kick rocks. And it's crazy because it's not even 2018 anymore, guys. We have an abundance of leftist candidates who also support Medicare for all and oppose genocide and oppose war. So there's no need to make Graham Platner, of all people, the figurehead of our movement and the hill that we die on, especially if embracing him drives a wedge between American leftists and the international leftist movement. They're always going to view us, American leftists, as self-interested opportunists who'd happily throw them under a bus for our own cause, our own policy interests. They're going to think that their lives are expendable to us so long as we get Medicare for all. And to be clear, I don't think that Platner's supporters on the left sincerely feel that way. I just think that they convinced themselves that he was something he wasn't. Nonetheless, I've got to say, the optics are real fucking bad. But to be fair, both of Platner's opponents were objectively genocidal, so it's not like there wasn't an argument that could have been made for pragmatism and harm reduction. Well, let's be honest. A lot of people, including people whom I respect, they weren't making that argument at all. They beclowned themselves to dick ride a war criminal and went so far as to chalk up opposition to him as anti-white racism. Seriously. Some even entertained the idea of Platner running in 2028 for president. And I've got to be honest, the popularity of Platner truly has shaken my faith in the left, because if the left is willing to overlook this many red flags, our movement really is susceptible to a future Manchurian candidate that can hijack the movement easily. Like, they can fucking roll us if they wanted to. All they have to do is support Medicare for all and give us some anti-Israel, anti-war sound bites, and a lot of leftists will go to bat for them. That's a problem. That is a problem that we have to face, especially at a time when we need to be more savvy than ever before, because the establishment is adapting now that the political climate is becoming more favorable to progressives. AIPAC isn't just propping up Zionist campaigns, they're running ads for leftist candidates to split the votes between anti-Zionists. But putting aside the political risks associated with candidates like Platner, I don't think it's wise for us to sacrifice our principles and morality for purposes of political expediency. As James put it, the Platner news should make some pause and think about how the exceptionalization of U.S. service members and veterans in discussions of actors complicit in systemic harm is what opens the door for actors like Platner to thrive without any remote accountability or penance. That lack of accountability stems from many being so willing to downplay harm done abroad by these service members in the name of U.S. empire, or even make justifications for their complicity. Devaluing the lives of those abroad for domestic political wins leads us here. And he's exactly right. If we sway away from our moral foundation and make exceptions for some candidates, it is going to come back to bite us in the asses in some way down the road. And we're going to need to learn from this, all of us, if leftism continues to grow in popularity, because we are bound to face even more moral tests in the future that we cannot fail. Like, if we give a pass to a war criminal Blackwater mercenary, would we also be willing to give a pass to an IDF soldier or a cop or an ICE agent that says that they reformed? I mean, if Platner was young and naive when he joined the military, couldn't the same also be said for a young man who joined ICE? ICE also tries to entice working class people with a $50,000 sign-on bonus in the same way that the military entices people with the promise of free college and healthcare. So, I mean, on one hand, they were in ICE, but on the other hand, they also say they regret it and they support Medicare for all. What are we going to do? Where do we draw the line? And again, lesser evilism and harm reduction arguments aside, I get being excited for candidates. I myself have been known to glaze leftist candidates on this channel from time to time. But when fellow leftists are pointing out legitimate concerns, is it really that unreasonable to be a bit more cautious and not dick ride as hard? Because when it came to Platner, people went out of their way to prop him up and make this man the face of the movement, when there's so many other talented candidates that they could be boosting who don't come with all of the baggage that Platner came with. And let's keep it real. Candidates like Abdul El Sayed and Zoran Mamdani, they have to be squeaky clean because they'd never get away with a fraction of the shit that Platner got away with. With that being said, I understand why some leftists felt compelled to defend Platner in the first place. He's a charismatic speaker, and he subverted expectations for leftist candidates who typically come off as overly smug and condescending and technocratic, and he just seemed like a regular dude, which is a breath of fresh air in 2026 America. And when every single establishment Zionist dickhead in the country is going out of their way to sink his campaign, and he's making all the right enemies seemingly, I understand the desire to rally around him and defend him from the attacks of objectively terrible fucking people within reason, though. And that right there is where I think my friends on the left went wrong. They suspended objectivity and attacked comrades for highlighting legitimate concerns about Graham Platner. And that is what really pissed me the fuck off about this entire kerfuffle that was avoidable, quite frankly. When you tune out criticism from good faith actors, from allies, from comrades, you open the movement up to situations like this, where wreckers come in and they opportunistically portray themselves one way when there's evidence to the contrary, and the people who want to ride or die with that candidate tune everybody out. Tell them to fuck off, no matter the cost to the movement long term. And to be clear, the leftists who rode for him the hardest, who scolded people for not supporting him enough, those are the people who would need to probably show some humility and admit that they were wrong. And I know that me saying this is going to come off as me lecturing people or an I told you so, but I promise you, don't take it that way. That's not my goal. I couldn't give two shits about who was right and who was wrong. I too have had to eat shit for promoting candidates that pulled a Fetterman, including Fetterman himself. We all have to take L sometimes, but my plea to everybody is that they actually take the L and learn from this fuck up and grow. It doesn't mean that we have to be overly cynical and nitpicky about candidates, but if there are warning signs that are especially being flagged by our non-white comrades, let's actually try to take them seriously the next time and not brush them aside in hopes that the flawed candidate gets us Medicare for all. I also would love Medicare for all, but actually getting it necessitates the elevation of actual leftists who are going to fight for it and not go full Republican the second they take office. And again, this doesn't mean that I don't think people can change. I believe in restorative justice, but if you're seeking political power, you have a higher threshold to meet than a regular person. People can change, yes, and that's great. And if they say that they changed when they really didn't, that's too bad. But it becomes a downright catastrophe if somebody who's lying about changing dupes us into giving them political power. And while I can't read Platner's mind, there's ample evidence that he is a violent, sociopathic liar who should be nowhere near political power. There's nothing stopping him from having a leftist political orientation. That's fine, but it doesn't mean that he also deserves political power ever, because even if he regrets the murders and the rape that he allegedly committed, that doesn't mean he's going to suddenly gain foresight needed to avoid more mistakes in the future, because if you can kill people and rape someone allegedly, nobody should trust you to make decisions on behalf of an entire fucking state. It is permanently disqualifying. It doesn't mean you can't change, but it also doesn't mean that you're entitled to a seat in the Senate. So, in conclusion, Graham Platner obviously needs to drop out as soon as possible, and ideally, he should also fuck off forever, go back to his little oyster farm in Maine, and never show his face in public again. And if we never hear his godforsaken name again, that'll be too fucking soon, because this man is an absolute wrecker, and it is embarrassing that he convinced anybody that people who opposed him or had questions about his past were the actual wreckers. Like, that is mind-boggling to me. So he can fuck all the way off, and I never want to hear from this piece of shit again.